How can this corroded scrap of metal change the history of a continent?
As soon as it's identified, wow.
It's the real deal.
Why can't we translate this 3,000-year-old relic of a lost civilization?
The Festos disc is one of the greatest mysteries of the Bronze Age.
And is this dead woman's face the most kissed in history?
She became what we would today call an it girl.
These are the most remarkable and mysterious objects on Earth. Hidden away in museums, laboratories, and storage rooms. Now, new research and technology can get under their skin like never before. We can rebuild them, pull them apart, and zoom in to reveal the unbelievable, the ancient, and the truly bizarre. These are the world's strangest things. In a display case, in the Maine State Museum in Augusta, sits a tiny scrap of metal that helped rewrite history. Because it is unlike anything ever found in the United States. Now, the latest imaging technology reveals it in astonishing detail. The Maine penny. Despite being less than an inch across with chipped and corroded metal, the Maine penny is one of the most famous coins in the world. Because it's not a penny, and it's not from Maine. Strangely, barely visible markings on it reveal something incredible. Vikings.
All of a sudden, this is Viking archaeology in North America. How did it get there, and what meaning did it have?
It flies in the face of accepted history at the time of the coin's find.
American school children were being taught that Columbus had discovered America.
So how does a Viking coin end up in Maine? Is it genuine or an elaborate hoax? Now, new research settles this question once and for all. This strange story begins at Naskag Point, an isolated site on the coast of Maine.
In the summer of 1957, an amateur archaeologist by the name of Guy Melgren and a friend set out to investigate a Native American midden, or trash heap.
They unearthed thousands of finds left by the indigenous people a millennia ago.
And amongst Native American tools and bone debris was a single remarkable eroded silver coin.
But coins have no place on a site like this.
1,000 years ago, indigenous American groups weren't using coinage.
So what exactly is it?
Melgren shows it to a friend of his who thinks it's a medieval English coin. Perhaps it came over with some of the earliest settlers to New England.
Melgren puts the coin on a shelf and forgets about it for nearly 2 decades.
And it sits in his house until 1974, when it makes its way to the museum.
A local paper publishes a short article about it. And that's when this object becomes one of history's strangest.
English coin expert Peter Seeby sees an article on it, sees the coin, and realizes it is a very rare Viking coin of Olaf the Peaceful.
This is an original Olaf the Peaceful coin. The similarities are undeniable. Experts date it as early as 1067. And that changes everything.
When it's considered to be a British penny, there's no real mystery as to how that might have turned up on an archaeological site. But as soon as this identified to King Olaf the Peaceful, wow, all of a sudden this is Viking archaeology in North America.
Somehow, a tiny piece of Viking history has been transported across the Atlantic to America and ended up in a 1,000-year-old trash heap on the coast of Maine. And that is huge.
American school children were being taught that Columbus had discovered America. The idea that there were somehow Vikings in contact with Native Americans 500 years before Columbus was big news.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So where is the evidence to back this up? The idea that Vikings might have got to North America first isn't news to Scandinavians. They know of the great Viking tales contained in the Icelandic sagas. In particular, the story of legendary explorer Leif Erikson.
Leif Erikson heard a tale from a shipwrecked mariner who had been carried by currents near a land to the west of Greenland, which he noted was covered with trees. This enticed Erikson, so he set out with one well-laden and equipped boat.
According to the sagas, Erikson reaches a new land he names Vinland.
When historians saw his descriptions of this country and the people he encountered, they thought there's only one place that this can be. This must be somewhere in North America, very possibly Newfoundland.
If there's any truth to those stories and those sagas, then it really does mean that the Vikings have made landfall on the North American continent much earlier than anybody else from a European perspective.
Could this incredible object really be proof of that? It certainly isn't the first Viking artifact to turn up in the States.
In 1898, there was the Kensington runestone in Minnesota.
The rune's translation records a voyage by 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians to Vinland in 1362 that encounters hostile locals. This seems to fit more or less with the Icelandic sagas. And there are other finds too.
In Ontario, there was a Viking sword, axe, and shield found. And there are also various bits of writing on stones which people attributed to being Viking runes.
North America seems to be littered with evidence that the Vikings were there before Columbus.
The problem is that none of these were, in fact, authentic. The Kensington runestone is now known to have been a forgery. The axes and shields likewise.
So why all the Viking fakes? The Kensington runestone may hold the answer.
If you look at the name of the man who discovered it, Olaf Ullman, you'll have a clue. These objects were found by people of Scandinavian descent who were combating a negative image.
Scandinavian immigrants to the U.S. had often been taunted and belittled.
So if these immigrants could prove that it wasn't an Italian, Columbus, who discovered the New World, but instead, effectively, a Scandinavian, Leif Erikson, this would be greatly to their credit.
And that makes the discovery of the Maine penny particularly suspicious. Because Mellgren, the man who finds it, is of Swedish descent himself. So is this strange artifact just another hoax? Could the Maine penny be just another in a long line of Viking hoaxes? One thing that isn't in doubt is the coin's origins in 11th century Norway.
The coin is definitely authentic. It's definitely a coin of King Olaf the Peaceful. But the big question then is, how could we know that this coin comes from an archaeological context?
Or more bluntly, did Mellgren plant it?
So Mellgren, himself of Swedish descent, has both a motive and an opportunity to plant this find.
To pull off a hoax, Mellgren would need the right coin. But by the late 1950s, that is relatively easy.
In 1879, a hoard of more than 2,000 such coins had come to light. So the coins themselves were easy enough to find.
Could Melgren have got hold of a real coin to plant? Now, brand new research claims to have finally answered this question.
The Swedish coin expert Vine Gullbeck decided to take on the enormous task of tracing every known coin find of Olaf the Peaceful.
Gullbeck tracks down more than 2,300 coins to find out if any could have made it into Melgren's hands. It's an enormous piece of research that takes over a decade to complete.
The result, after exhaustive study, is that no Olaf the Peaceful coins were unaccounted for.
Additionally, unlike the main penny, all other Olaf the Peaceful coins are in very good condition.
The main penny is very heavily corroded, and that's hard to fake. This is a process that goes on across the centuries.
The Maine State Museum analyzes the chemistry of these layers of corrosion. The results support the object's authenticity.
There's evidence water has sat around the coin. It's been sat in slowly moving water for a very long period of time, and this would be supportive of the fact that it's been buried for a long period of time.
There's no doubt that the main penny is the real deal.
Melgren did not plant the main penny. In which case, how did it find its way to a Native American settlement 1,000 years ago? In 1960, 3 years after Melgren discovers the main penny, Norwegian archaeologist Anna-Stina Ingstad and her husband Helga are investigating a site at S01E06 Meadows in Newfoundland. Locals describe it as an old Indian camp, but it's something far stranger.
They find the bases of turf structures. One large hall, also a blacksmith's workshop. They find remnants of Viking boat sheds. So this is definitive proof that the Vikings were the first Europeans to come to America.
The Icelandic sagas are true. Vikings really do reach North America 500 years before Columbus. It's a revelation. But it doesn't explain the coin's discovery 750 miles further south. Because not a single scrap of evidence ever turns up to suggest the Vikings reach anywhere near this far down. So how does a Viking coin end up in Maine?
Renewed professional excavations at Naskiag Point have not found any other traces of Norse artifacts. But what they have found are stone tools and stone raw materials coming from as far away as Labrador, hundreds of miles to the north.
So there's evidence here for trade, for the movement of goods and also the movement of people over really quite significant distances.
Despite the fact that it has no value to the indigenous people as a coin, one feature may explain why and how they carry it south. Although it has since crumbled away, when Melgren finds the coin, it has a hole in it.
It's been perforated, which would indicate that it was being used as an object of decoration, perhaps worn around the neck or around the wrist. But the important thing is that this object was not being used as a coin.
So it's likely local peoples transport the coin from Newfoundland all the way to Maine. This remarkable object was created a millennia ago on the far side of a stormy ocean. Like the finds at S01E06 Meadows, it proves that Columbus isn't the first European in North America. The Vikings beat him to it 500 years earlier. In a museum in Crete sits a strangely marked clay disc that has sparked over a century of controversy. Some say it is one of the most astonishing texts ever found, a 3,000-year-old cryptic message from an ancient civilization. Others claim it's just too good to be true. Now, using the latest imaging technology, we're bringing it into the light. This is the Festos disk, measuring roughly ½ an inch thick and 6 inches in diameter, made from fire-baked clay. Its two sides are covered with inscriptions. Made using a technology thousands of years ahead of its time, this disk is unique.
It's the only object that we know of that looks like that.
There are 242 strange symbols, from Mohican-haired men to twisted figures, birds, fish, and other cryptic shapes.
The Festos disk is one of the greatest mysteries of the Bronze Age, and we've not been able to decode it yet.
But now, after more than a century of debate, new research may have made the first steps to revealing its secrets. So what do these bizarre symbols mean? What is the disk for? Is it genuine? The mystery of the Festos disk begins on the island of Crete in Greece. A place steeped in mythological stories of a lost civilization called the Minoans. Ancient legends tell the story of their ruler, King Minos. Beneath his palace, he builds a vast labyrinth to imprison a fearsome beast called the Minotaur.
The Minotaur was this terrifying half-man, half-bull creature, and it was kind of the scourge of anyone who came to visit Minos. They would basically be eaten by this Minotaur.
The creature and the civilization behind it were considered little more than ancient Greek legends.
A lot of people thought it was mythology, that perhaps they were just kind of mythical people.
But in 1900, near the north coast of the island, British archaeologist Arthur Evans makes a discovery that changes everything. The ruins of a vast Minoan palace 4,000 years old.
It's really a major deal for archaeologists. This is the first time we discover that they're actually a real civilization. They're not just some made-up mythology.
It transformed our understanding of what Mediterranean civilizations were capable of at this time.
The site is called Knossos, and it has intriguing links to the ancient legends.
When Arthur Evans began excavations at Knossos, he notices there are a lot of bull symbols. He understood that, hey, this may be a place associated with the Minotaur story.
It is a previously unknown and extraordinarily sophisticated ancient civilization. It existed at a time when the crowning achievement of most other European societies is building wooden huts and stone circles. But there is more to come. In 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier excavates a second Minoan palace complex on the south of the island. It is called Festos. One evening, Pernier's foreman happens on a small clay disc lying in the ruins. The bizarre symbols covering its surface are unlike anything Pernier has ever seen. But this disc is exceptional in every way.
Normally, such tablets for writing would have been formed out of wet clay, and then when they were leather hard, they would have been written upon and simply left to dry in the sun.
The disc was very different. This disc, first of all, was baked, so rather than sun-dried, it was actually fired.
It is the only Minoan clay tablet ever found that's been fired in a kiln. And that's just the start, because there's something remarkable about the symbols on it. Most writing at this time was inscribed into the clay, but the symbols on the Festos disc have been stamped.
The fact that it was impressed by a stamp has also been considered a unique discovery. And some archaeologists have, in fact, called this perhaps the oldest or first evidence of a type of printing press.
There is literally nothing else like it in the ancient world.
Given the care that was taken in it, the degree of its firing, all of these things mean that this was a special object which was viewed as worthy of special treatment and preservation.
What could have been worth all this effort? Could the answer lie in decoding these strange symbols?
For over 100 years now, people have been trying to decipher what exactly is on that disk. There have been a number of interpretations. It could have been an ancient game, perhaps, a kind of backgammon or something like that. Another interpretation is it's used for some kind of astronomical or astrological purposes.
But one obvious theory has gained more traction among experts than any other.
More likely, it's some kind of language. Whether it's a localized language or a slightly more widespread language is debatable, but it seems to be something meant to be read, or at least perhaps even announced to an audience.
But experts couldn't even agree which direction they should read this language in.
Archaeologists initially thought that you started from the inside of the disk and read kind of in a swirl pattern coming out to the outer edges. But then when they looked more closely at the symbols, they seemed to get more crowded and difficult as you move from the outer rim inside. So scholars now think that it's more likely that it was read working from the outside in.
But what does it actually say? There are 242 impressions on the disk using 45 unique symbols. Most alphabets have far fewer symbols than the Festos disk. So experts think it's probably not an alphabet. But it has too few symbols and too many repetitions to be a pictographic script, where one symbol can represent an entire word, such as Egyptian hieroglyphics or Babylonian cuneiform. Instead, experts suspect the Festos script is what's known as a syllabary, in which symbols represent syllables such as do, re, mi. Syllabaries fit well with the number of symbols on the disk, and we already know another Minoan script uses them. But a century of intense effort by experts has failed to get any further with its meaning. Now, after years of analysis, Gareth Owens, a British linguistics scholar, claims to have solved at least part of the riddle.
What Owens has done is try and find a parallel text, something else that either has a similar function or has a similar type of text. Going through looking for other examples in other languages is a kind of natural process.
Owens has matched a sequence of symbols on the disk with a pattern of symbols on Minoan religious artifacts, believed to be a prayer. He has also identified another pattern of symbols on the disk, repeated 3 times like a chant, which is similar to an older Cretan symbol pattern meaning Mother Goddess. His theory? The disk is a prayer to the Mother Goddess.
This would fit quite well with what we know. The Mother Goddess was very important to Minoan society, so having some kind of dedication, a prayer to her, seems to be logical. We do see some repetition in this disk, like you would do in a prayer. And the fact that it's baked clay seems to indicate that it's a high-valued item. And so having a religious reason as to why you have this disk, I think makes a lot of sense.
But the problem with every theory about the disk is that nothing quite like it has ever been found. The strange symbols, the use of stamps thousands of years before anyone else, the fact that it's the only kiln-fired tablet the Minoans ever produce. It seems out of place and out of time. But there is one explosive theory that could answer every question about this mysterious object. The Festos disk is a unique ancient relic, and that worries some experts.
The uniqueness of this object, as is often the case with unique objects, rings a lot of alarm bells.
We would expect to find more of these objects, because if someone had made the stamp and had the set, then we would think particularly something that is made in clay, which is a relatively durable material, that we would have more of these surviving.
Establishing its age is also troublesome. The disk itself has not been directly dated, but as it was found near a tablet made between 1700 and 1600 BCE, archaeologists have assumed it's the same age. But the issue is clouded by the unusual circumstances of its discovery.
It wasn't actually found by a professional archaeologist. It was an area which had been previously excavated and was spotted by a foreman doing their rounds.
So is it the real deal, or did someone plant it? Suspicion has fallen on one person in particular at Festos. Site director Luigi Pernier has a strong motive to conjure up a fake.
What was being found to the north at Knossos by Arthur Evans was quite sensational. The supposed throne of King Minos. Phaistos, by comparison, is a relatively humble palatial complex, which had, up to the find of the Phaistos disc, provided nothing really sensational for the media of the time or to the credit of Luigi Pernier.
The disc definitely puts Pernier's Festos site on the map. It raises his archaeological profile immensely. And that's not the only detail that casts a shadow over Pernier.
Pernier was also responsible for antiquities in Florence, in Italy, and the museum there. And in its collections was a remarkable Etruscan disc, known as the Milano disc. The disc is circular. There is a set of symbols engraved in a helical or spiral shape, which looks uncannily similar to the Phaistos disc.
Pernier has means, motive, opportunity, and even inspiration. Case closed? Nothing about this unique object is that simple. Decades after the disc's discovery, another relic turns up.
In 1934, an axe was found. This bronze axe actually had symbology that were very similar to what was found on the disc.
It is known as the Arkalahori axe. Running down the center of the axe are a series of unusual symbols. Some appear strangely similar to symbols on the Festos disc. A plant, a T-shape, a Y-shaped stick-like symbol, and most striking of all, a man with spiky hair.
So that supports the argument that this was an authentic disc, that these kinds of symbols were symbols that would have been known to at least somebody from this region.
The question is, how would Pernier have known, if he was faking the disc, to make symbols which had not yet officially been archaeologically discovered? This might attest to the authenticity of the disc.
So, fake or not fake?
I think it's real. I think the symbology that has been found subsequent to this disc, the fact that it's very similar to it, and at the time of the discovery were not known symbols, indicates to me that it's real.
Others are less certain.
The Phaistos disc is one of those rare enigmatic objects that it is very difficult to make an absolute judgment about.
What I've often found is when we call something a fake, sometimes that is largely because we can't understand what it was used for. I don't see clear signs that it's a fake. And I would certainly like to believe that it's real.
Controversy about the disc's authenticity has raged for 100 years. It shows no signs of being settled anytime soon. On display in an old workshop in Paris is the death mask of a drowned girl. Some claim this is the most kissed face in history.
She inspired people, poets, music, dance, and she was really well known.
And she's said to have saved over 2 million lives. Now, using the latest imaging technology, we're bringing this mysterious mask into the light. Every feature immortalized in plaster, in exceptional detail. The serene expression, the eyelids lightly closed, and that strange, enigmatic smile. This mask appears again and again in museums and private collections across the world. But the woman behind it is shrouded in mystery. Who is she? How did she die? Why is she so famous? Who is the mysterious girl behind this famous death mask? Her macabre story begins in Paris. In the mid-19th century, it is a sightseer's paradise. You can climb the 422 steps of Notre Dame's towers, meander through the halls of the Louvre, or marvel at the newly built Arc de Triomphe. But one of the biggest crowd pullers is the Paris morgue.
They were lining up and queuing to see which people were put on display. There were street vendors, like today when there's something entertaining taking place. So it was just, fashionable for normal people to go and watch the corpses.
In theory, this is done to aid in the identification of the dead. But it quickly becomes a grisly form of entertainment.
This is a show in the middle of Paris that's free to enter because they want everybody to come and have a look to identify the bodies, in which naked dead people are laid out in front of you. So I think you have to imagine the sort of social thing that's going on here. We're looking at a sort of mixture of titillation and thrill.
Out of this macabre world appears this mysterious face.
The story goes that a drowned woman was found in the River Seine. Nobody claimed the body, so it was brought to the morgue. Since there were no signs of violence on her body, people thought that she probably killed herself by drowning.
Her flawless complexion suggests she is around 16 years old. Her hairstyle fits that of a peasant girl. Despite being displayed to the public, it seems no one steps forward to identify the drowned girl. But she catches someone's eye.
One of the morgue staff decided that the face was calm and interesting, and the person was captivated and decided to build a plaster cast. And everybody who went in could also see the mask.
In an era before photography, it isn't uncommon for morgue attendants to take plaster casts before the faces deteriorate too much to identify. But how does this one become one of the most famous death masks of all time? Making casts of a dead person's face sounds macabre today. But it wasn't always like that. 2,000 years ago in Rome, they are a family affair.
The Greek historian Polybius in the 2nd century BC wrote about these things called imagines meorum. These are the wax masks that Romans would make after someone died. The idea would be that at every funeral, they would get these masks out and wear them as part of the funerary procession as a way of remembering not just the one person being buried, but making sure that the entire family was present. Kind of exciting, but also a bit creepy.
But as far as we know, no family comes to identify and preserve the mask of this young woman. Yet she achieves immortality. She's not the first death mask to become famous, although others were rather better known in life. Oliver Cromwell, the 17th century general who overthrew the English monarchy. Ludwig van Beethoven, one of the most revered composers of the Western world. And scientist Sir Isaac Newton, the man who discovered gravity. These are all historical celebrities. And for the most famous celebrity death mask of all, you have to look to Egypt, almost 3,500 years ago, to the death mask of a king, no less, Tutankhamun.
The ancient Egyptians believed that your ba, or your soul, would go into the afterlife, and in order to identify its body, so soul and body can be reunited, it needed to have something really visual, really clear, to identify your body as you. Tutankhamun's very famous death mask is a really, really good example of that.
But this young girl is no royal. She doesn't produce great works of art or make world-changing scientific breakthroughs. She is the total opposite, completely unknown. So why does her death mask become so famous? It may just be a question of right time, right place. In Europe, during the Victorian era, masks become a key part of an obsession with death. They are keepsake reminders of our mortality, known as memento mori.
Death masks were a normal way of dealing with death. People have them about themselves, have them in their houses, use them as little reminders of the sweetness of life, as well as the shortness of life. Like we might keep the photograph of somebody who's passed away, you might keep a death mask of your child that you'd lost.
In this culture, the plaster mask of the drowned girl from the Paris morgue finds a receptive audience. She becomes known as l'inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine.
At the beginning of the 20th century, the mask of l'inconnue de la Seine was relatively widespread.
Thousands of copies of her death mask are made. Her enigmatic features capture the imagination of novelists and poets. Famous French philosopher Albert Camus even compares her smile to the Mona Lisa.
L'inconnue de la Seine became what we would today call an it girl. She was known, she inspired people, poets, music, dance.
But how does a dead it girl become the most kissed face in the world? How does the death mask of an unknown girl become the most kissed face in history? The answer to this mystery begins with the search for a way to preserve life. When l'inconnue's body is fished out of the Seine, resuscitation is still in its infancy, and there are some pretty bizarre methods.
People are looking at many different ways that you might help stimulate a person to bring them back. One is to whip them all over with stinging nettles, that sort of would get the blood moving all over the body and therefore perhaps trigger something into action.
Maybe they could resuscitate people by putting you over a trotting horse or putting hot ashes on your skin. A method that sounds surprising is to blow tobacco fumes inside of the anus of a person that you try to resurrect.
You'd make up a really strong concoction infused with tobacco, and then you'd introduce it at the other end, and hope that that would also stimulate and excite the whole bodily system, jerk it back into life.
Unsurprisingly, none of these methods really help. So how does this face become part of the solution? It isn't until the 1950s and the work of an Austrian anesthesiologist that modern medicine really gets to grips with resuscitation.
Peter Safar came up with the idea that you could resuscitate a person correctly, for example, by putting the head a little bit to the back, giving mouth to mouth, applying chest compression to get the heart started again. So he invented CPR.
Safar reasons that if everyone learns these techniques, more lives will be saved. To do that, he needs a realistic training model for people to practice on. But no such model exists. Yet.
In 1959, Dr. Safar goes to a toy maker, a Norwegian toy maker of his acquaintance, Asmund Liadal. And Asmund has a lot of experience using PVC, a brand new material, but he thinks that this might be the way forward. And between them, they come up with a mannequin which mimics the basic usage of a pair of lungs within a person. Nearing the end of the process, Liadal has his doll, but it hasn't got a face at the moment, so where on earth is he going to get one of those?
Lyodal wants a passive, non-threatening face.
Well, luckily at this moment he goes and visits his in-laws, and there, on the wall, is hanging L'inconnu de la Seine. Perfect. Absolutely perfect.
And this is why you have the face of L'inconnu de la Seine on the CPR mannequin.
And the unknown girl finally gets a name. Ressusciane. It's estimated she has been used to train more than 500 million people worldwide and saved as many as 2.5 million lives. A girl who drowned in the Seine more than 150 years ago has become the most kissed face in history. But there's one last twist to the story of L'Inconnu de la Seine. Her drowned face is famously picture perfect, and that's a problem.
When you die in water and your body is resting or laying in water for an amount of time, then your skin starts to slip, or you get marbling, which means you have bacteria in your veins. And since you don't see that on the death mask, some people thought that maybe she was not dead.
And that's not the only unexplained thing about her.
One thing that is mentioned often is that when you look at the eyeballs are not perfectly round.
When your eyes are shut, the lens underneath creates a slight bump in the eyelid. Some have suggested that this bump is not circular on L'Inconnu's face, as though the eyes were moving while the plaster was setting. So is this really the face of a dead woman? Or is she just a fiction built around an artist's model? We'll probably never know for sure.